Lacking across the board, the government's advisors on climate change warned that the UK is unprepared for the impacts of the climate crisis. Hundreds of academics urged the Prime Minister to end approvals for new oil and gas projects in the UK. Could this be the future of food? Scientists grow meat using the cells of an extinct mother. Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and investigate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. Now, the government's own independent climate advisors are warning that the UK is strikingly unprepared for the effects of climate change, with ministers presiding over a lost decade of preparations. In a new report, the Climate Change Committee has said last summer's 40-degree heatwave en route showed just how vulnerable the UK is to a hotter climate without better planning. Less out of the chief executive of that committee, Chris. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. So why is the UK so unprepared for the effects of climate change? Well, that's a very important question, and the most you will have a very good answer, because we're really seeing a massive quantities playing own home. And we talk a lot about the period last summer. Was we not first over 40 degrees centigrade? The past is one of these signals of climate change, that a host of others impacts they're being felt across the board. Radical. The university in the UK is not a loony inexpediency in it, but listen, over the UK of us are good people living in the country. I think people are no aware of climate change. They understand that we're in the group to the end. Yes, we do not have a program of policies and plans from this government that is anywhere close to where it needs to be. When we look at that program's called the National Adaptation Program, I'm pretty sure that even the audience with issue is not one has read that program, because it is sitting away in a dusty cupboard somewhere, sir, and a small bit of government that has been tasked with bringing that together, and it just does not have the political focus that way. He should have said one of the reasons for publishing a report today. We're doing so rarely. We do one every couple of years. We did the early this year to try to inform the next program from this government was during the summer. Chris, let's talk about that report. Well, the report about the National Adaptation Program, cause it's quite start. It says that this program fails to match the scale of the challenge, lacks a clear vision, isn't underpinned by tangible outcomes or targets, and hasn't driven policy or implementation. How has that been allowed to happen? Well, I'm afraid this is the effects of collectively politicians and politics not grasping the challenge. No, I understand that politics doesn't want to look into this and actually, granted the size of we really do need a political class that's ready to tackle this properly. No, you can do this in a more saddling for too long. We've been thinking about this as something for a future term of office, UN climate change, or something of happen in the future, or even worse, climate change, something along that will happen to other parts the and not to us. None of that is true. Of course, gonna change is with us. No, and even if it is happening somebody else, we also exposed to that. To just think about the empty shells that we've seen this year. That's the kind of in a car. Comes from extreme weather, climate-related impacts to supply chains in this country. Last is one of these impacts. So this is such an all-encompassing thing. It used to me very strange that we haven't had politics cyclists in a more extreme way, in a more direct way. I think we've been looking a lot of the challenge of Nancy you, of course, the fail. A very, very important goal of reaching as you globally enriching that C2 in the UK. No, it seems to me is the time to receive need to do the other bits of this, which is the course to achievements, but also to adopt the economy, adapt to society, to be changing the climate we knew was coming. Remember, if we hit Nancy to globally by the middle of a century, our broadly keepers and in some shape or form on track for attempt to targets in the Paris Agreement. But that means that we will have to see continuing warming for 2 decades, possibly 3 decades, or more over that period. So this is something that's really very, very important, and then there's a window for us to act on it. We don't take it, of course, we're going to regret it later. You have laid out a clear path of the government to improve the country's climate resilience. How optimistic are you that they are actually going to follow that path? Well, I'm not sure that I'm optimistic, but I am positive. But the ability for us to do something about it again. One of the reasons for publisher going to poorer early in the year this thing is that we wanted to give the government bit of time to prepare for that. We've had to national adaptation programs covering the last decade and more. We referred to that as a last decade but they haven't really yet grabbed the issue the way that they should. If anything, what they're doing is kind of hoovering up a set of things that the GUM was already doing and putting them in one place. I started program at that's a description of things that were already happening. Is not a surprise to me that the things that we have acted on in this country have been the things that the politicians building was pressured on, and that's why flooding is an issue that has been grasped. Course has more to do and flooding, but is one of course that gets more attention. We need to get the same attention to other media soon as next programs coming up from the It's during the summer, at some point lead by there from under. I think really and sure we say what we think we need to see. That is some really useful advice for the government, if they want to take it. If the government doesn't take it, and I think winter a different world of dialing up the criticism still further, and asking questions that there for itself was able to cope with these kind of important national issues. Chris, thank you so much taking the time to speak to us. Thank you. Heartless. Let's take a look at some of that is other stories now. And the European Court of Human Rights is to consider two cases of European governments accused of failing to protect the environment. In Switzerland, more than 2,000 people are claiming the government's climate change policies are risking their health and their living conditions, and in France a former mayor is accusing the government of taking insufficient steps to prevent climate change. A new study has found that microplastic pollution along the country's coastline is 100 times the level it was 6 years ago. The data was collected last summer by teams competing in the GB Rubbing Challenge around the UK. Scientists at the University of Portsmouth then analysed the samples using new technology that allowed them to get picture of pollution levels. Now to tell us the potential of lab-grown meat, an Australian company has created this. It's a meatball using the genetic code of a woolly mammoth. The project aims to show the potential of creating meat products without the slaughter of animals. The company called Val hopes the technology could help vastly reduce the huge environmental impact of meat production. Would you eat? That is the question. Hundreds of academics have set a lesson to the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, urging him to end approvals for all new oil and gas development. It comes on the eve of a government announcement on energy security and net zero. The letter has been signed by 700 experts from universities and research parties across the UK, as is approving new oil fields like the proposed Rosebank project of Shetland would undermine the UK position as a global climate lead. Let's speak to someone who's actually signed that letter. Professor Emily Bai is the director of Cambridge Zero at the University of Cambridge. Emily, thank you so much for talking to us. So why are these scientists leisure, and what are you hoping that achieves? Well, the IPCC came out last Monday to say that there is a rapidly closing window to secure a livable future for all, and we just heard from Crystals how I would seen those impacts of climate change playing out in the UK and across the world today. In that context, we really wanted as the climate research community to send a very strong statement to the government that it is simply incompatible with our national and international response to climate change to be looking at this time to open up new fossil fuel oil infrastructure. The IPCC was very clear, in fact, that emissions from existing fossil fuel infrastructure, without additional abatement, such as carbon capture and storage would be sufficient to exhaust the budget to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees of warming. What do you make of the argument that if we do stop the new development of oil and gas, there will be real concerns about both the affordability and the security of our energy supplies, which has something that we have seen this year already, isn't it? Well, absolutely, I buy the affordability, and the security supplies are incredibly important elements to consider. Buds are the App City's most powerful way of securing affordability and security of supply is to really leg at enhancing our renewable technologies that we already have in place, whether that's solar or wind, and enhancing the necessary storage technologies that are associated with that. We know how to produce our energy needs without fossil fuels. And another really good Clement and of that, of course, is looking as an energy efficiency, how we can improve the insulation of our hands, which we know is something that is a really poor, and the UK, and therefore reduce our dependency on our office and fuel infrastructure. So what do you make of the proposed raise bank or for the Shetland Islands? Below are I think it just the fact that we had so many people from the UK academic community sign this letter to the Prime Minister sends of a really strong statement that it, as I say, it is just scientifically incompatible with our climate response on our duty to take a leadership, a national and international leadership associated with this, to be looking takes banned fossil fuel infrastructure at this time. Emily, thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you. Now, Poole Harbour was the subject of a damaging oil leak earlier this week, raising fears about the impact on wildlife in an area of special scientific interest. Our data on forensics unit has been looking into what happened at Poker Report. Something that with environmental disaster happening and nobody seems to know what's happening. A major there was declared on Sunday after around 20,000 litres of reservoir fluid leaked from a pipeline. Doja, the fluid made up of 85% water and 50% oil, came from our bay. It's Poole Harbour, its title, so the leaked oil would have been moving in surrounding waters. The Witch Farm onshore, all filled, is the largest in Western Europe, is operated by Perenco. The main gathering station is here with crude oil extracted from more than 10 well sites. The pipelines connecting them run around 2 to 3 meters underground. Sky News understands the leak occurred here next to well site D. Bubbling water was spotted, indicating oil was rising from below ground. The V from the gathering station across the harbour shows the area immediately affected by the spill on the far side, 2 miles from the leak. This video is filmed from Hamworthy Park, and this was taken at Quay, also on the other side of the harbour. The leak location, as part the cleanup operation, a floating skimmer, is being used to extract the oil from the surface. It's being pumped into this portable tank and extracted by the tanker. Downstream closer to Poole Harbour, booms are being used to stop the spread further and contain the spill. People are being told to stay out of the water, and while the full environmental impact is not yet known, the RSPB says birds have been spotted around the harbour. This show dog was showing signs of contamination, Illich Bay, more than 4 miles from the leak. We don't know yet exactly how the leak happened, but the government says a full investigation will take place. Adam Parker, Sky News. Before we go, reminder that we want your climate questions, anything that's ever mystified you about the environment, or whatever you want to get to the bottom of. Scan the QR code and send us your questions, which we will answer in the Pirates Show with Tom Heap. Hi, you can watch Tom's show on Saturday and Sunday at 3 p.m. here on Sky News. That's all from us today. Thank you so much for watching.